The broom cracked against my security camera with a loud snap, followed by a shrill voice. "Privacy is a two-way street, mister." I was on my front porch, coffee in hand, watching in disbelief as Cheryl Haskins, our HOA vice president and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, took another swing at the camera mounted above my garage. "Cheryl, are you out of your mind?" I shouted, rushing down the steps. She lowered the broom like she was proud. "You're violating HOA aesthetics. That camera is an eyesore and makes people uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable? It's pointed at my own driveway. I don't care." "Multiple neighbors have complained," she said, her jaw twitching like she was chewing on lemon rind. I knew exactly what this was. Ever since I refused to vote for Cheryl's ridiculous, mandatory shrub uniformity proposal, she'd been gunning for me. Now she was escalating. "My name's Mason Teller. I'm a nurse who works night shifts at the city hospital. A few weeks ago, I installed a modest security system after someone let their dog loose in my yard and left a mess. Not saying it was Cheryl, but let's just say I found a pamphlet for her HOA re-election in the doggy surprise. After she stormed off in a huff, I checked the footage. The camera still worked, but the lens was cracked. She'd come onto my property and physically damaged it. I called the police. They took a report but said it was a civil matter unless I had more evidence, so I upgraded. The next morning, I had a brand new system installed, 4 discrete, high-res cameras with night vision, motion detection, and cloud backups. One over the garage, one at the side gate, one near the backyard, and one cleverly camouflaged in the mailbox post, angled toward the sidewalk. I didn't tell anyone, not even my neighbor Greg, who usually knows everything before I do, and that's when things got interesting. 2 nights later, around 2 in the morning, I got a motion alert on my phone. I checked the footage and just about choked on my drink. There she was, Cheryl. In a bathrobe, creeping through my flower bed with a flashlight and a clipboard. She paused at the side of my house, crouched by the HVAC unit, and started writing something. Then she walked up to my porch and, get this, measured the distance from the welcome mat to the door with a measuring tape. I stared at the footage in disbelief. Trespassing. Documenting. What violations? In the middle of the night. The next morning, I printed out stills from the footage and brought them to the emergency HOA meeting she called supposedly to discuss neighborhood security concerns. I was ready. And Cheryl had no idea her little broom stunt had just opened the biggest can of worms she'd ever seen. The meeting was held in Cheryl's garage, which she'd arranged like it was a courtroom. Folding chairs in rows, a snack table with stale cookies, and a whiteboard that read "Neighborhood Integrity Emergency Session" in red dry erase. She stood at the front in a blazer over a turtleneck, clutching her clipboard like a judge gearing up for sentencing. I took a seat in the back, keeping the envelope in my lap. The room was filled with our usual neighbors, Mr. Dale from across the street, who never made eye contact, Trina, who ran the local pet grooming van, and the Patel twins, who mostly kept to themselves. Cheryl's husband, Don, sat stiffly at the side, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Cheryl cleared her throat. "This meeting is to address an escalating issue affecting the comfort and cohesion of our community," she began, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Certain individuals have installed surveillance systems that, frankly, create a sense of unease." She didn't look at me, not directly, but everyone else did. "I want to remind residents that any external modifications to your home must be submitted for review by the HOA Architectural Committee. This includes visible security hardware." Trina raised a hand. "What about doorbell cams?" Cheryl gave a tight smile. "Those are acceptable if they're integrated and non-disruptive. But when someone mounts multiple high-tech devices in a way that suggests suspicion or paranoia, it changes the neighborhood dynamic." I waited until she moved on to possible penalties for non-compliance. Then I stood up. "I'd like to submit evidence to the HOA," I said, stepping forward and placing the envelope on the folding table next to her. "Documented activity that took place on my property. Since we're discussing neighborhood cohesion, I think this footage is relevant. She blinked. Excuse me, but this isn't the time, it's exactly the time, I interrupted. You called this meeting to talk about security. I have security footage of someone entering my property without permission at 2 in the morning. Repeatedly. With a flashlight and a measuring tape. A few people leaned forward now. I took out my tablet and brought up the footage, casting it to the small projector she'd left connected to a laptop. The screen lit up with a grainy but clear image. Cheryl, crouching by my AC unit, scribbling notes. The room fell quiet except for a low gasp from Mr. Dale. Cheryl stepped in front of the screen. This is a violation of my privacy. You were on my property, Cheryl, I said calmly. Uninvited, at night, more than once. That's trespassing. I was performing a property compliance inspection. You had no right to do it without notice or approval, and certainly not at that hour. Her face flushed, but before she could speak, Greg, my neighbor and a retired county clerk, stood up from the side. Actually, he said, pulling out a small binder, I dug into the HOA charter after your last memo. There's nothing in the bylaws that authorizes unscheduled inspections by board members. In fact, Section 6 explicitly states that property evaluations must be requested in writing and approved by the homeowner. Otherwise, it's a violation of state property laws. He glanced at Cheryl. And if you're trespassing with intent to fabricate violations. That's a whole different legal category. That got murmurs. Someone in the back whispered, "Is that why she was sniffing around my yard last month?" Cheryl's voice was sharper now. I was ensuring community standards were upheld. If you people don't care about property values, no one asked you to trespass on private land, I said. And I've already filed a report with the police. They advised me to collect additional evidence, which I now have, including your little stunt with the broom. Gasps again. Don put his hand over his face. Oh, and just so there's no confusion, I added, pulling out a printed screenshot, here's a still of you damaging my camera. Time stamped. I've already submitted it to my attorney. For the first time, Cheryl stepped back from the table, her voice faltered. You're blowing this out of proportion. I was trying to protect. No, Cheryl, Greg cut in. You were abusing your position. And considering you did this while acting as an HOA officer, your behavior could be classified as misconduct under civil statute. Trina crossed her arms. You can't just make up violations and go sneaking around yards. That's creepy. The Patel twins nodded in unison. I turned to the room. I'd like to motion for Cheryl's immediate suspension from the HOA board pending legal review. Greg followed. Seconded. Cheryl's mouth moved like she was about to argue, but no sound came. Dawn stood up silently and walked out of the garage. She didn't follow. We took a vote. It wasn't even close. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me. Trina offered to give me a discount on grooming for my cat. Mr. Dale mumbled something about installing a camera of his own. Even the twins, who rarely spoke, offered to help me trim the hedges to keep the view lines clear for my new system. But the real twist came 2 days later. I got a knock on my door, 2 uniformed officers and a man in plain clothes with a badge clipped to his belt. Mason Teller, the plainclothes officer asked. Yes. I'm Detective Reyes with the County Fraud Unit. We're investigating a series of complaints regarding HOA fund mismanagement. Your name came up during a recent tip related to surveillance footage. I stepped aside. You're going to want to see this, I said. I've got a lot more than trespassing on tape. And I did, because Cheryl wasn't just prowling around at night. The new cameras had picked up something even worse. Her pulling a stack of envelopes from the HOA drop box and replacing them with nearly identical ones. Same stamps, different handwriting ballots. She'd been tampering with the last vote on the neighborhood budget, the one that allowed the board to raise monthly dues by 20%. Now it was a criminal investigation. And Cheryl. She was about to learn that the only thing more dangerous than a nurse with a camera was a nurse with receipts. Detective Reyes leaned in close to the monitor as I queued up the footage. His face stayed neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly once the time-stamped clip began to play. "There," I said, pausing the video. "That's her pulling out the mail and inserting different envelopes. That's the HOA drop box. It's supposed to be locked." The officer standing beside him, a younger guy with a buzz cut and a notepad, let out a quiet whistle. Reyes didn't look away from the screen. "You have a copy of the original HOA ballot you submitted in my filing cabinet, unopened until the day after this footage was recorded. Get it," he said, already dialing a number on his phone. "We'll need a handwriting analyst, and I want to cross-check those ballots against the originals. If she tampered with vote counts, that's felony-level mail fraud." As I walked to the back room, I heard Reyes say something about a search warrant and a forensic sweep. When I returned with the envelope, he carefully placed it into a clear evidence bag, then handed me a formal statement form. "Write down exactly what you saw when you installed the cameras and any other suspicious activity you've documented. Be specific. This footage could be the linchpin in a wider investigation." I finished the report in under an hour. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I had assumed Cheryl was a petty tyrant, but this crossed into something deeper, something criminal. By the end of the day, 2 unmarked sedans rolled into the neighborhood. Reyes and his team didn't go to Cheryl's house directly. They started at the HOA's rented storage unit on the edge of town. Greg had tipped them off about it, a place she used to store committee materials. But no one had ever seen inside. That was where things unraveled. Inside, investigators found more than just leftover flyers and gardening tools. There were stacks of forms ballots, maintenance invoices, even handwritten letters from residents that had never been responded to. One whole box was labeled "Appeals Discard." It held dozens of unopened envelopes from homeowners contesting fines, all ignored, but the real find was the ledger. Not digital, not even typed. A battered spiral-bound notebook filled with years' worth of handwritten entries, dates, amounts, and initials. Payments that didn't match HOA bank records. Dues marked collected with no corresponding deposit. More than $30,000 was unaccounted for. Reyes called me the next morning. "We've got probable cause for financial misconduct, ballot tampering, and obstruction. We're bringing her in today." I was outside watering the lawn when the cruiser pulled up in front of Cheryl's beige stucco house. Half the block stopped what they were doing as 2 officers approached the door. Don answered. He didn't say anything, just stepped back and pointed down the hall. She came out in a peach robe and slippers, shouting that she needed to make a call. The officers didn't argue. They cuffed her on the porch, read her rights, and walked her to the car with the same calm professionalism I'd seen in the ER when security had to escort out belligerent patients. Trina stood on her porch holding a mug, eyebrows raised. "Well, I guess HOA stands for handcuffs on authority now." I didn't laugh, not yet. My mind was already turning. The board was down a president and vice president, and the remaining members had all either resigned or gone silent. The HOA was legally inoperable. We had no functioning leadership, no budget oversight, and no point of contact for the city. That afternoon, Greg came by with a printed copy of the community covenant and a suggestion. "You ever think about running a recall election?" he asked. "We technically still have the right to restructure the board if we get enough signatures. City ordinance says we only need 25% of homeowners to sign a petition. Wouldn't that mean I'd be on the board, maybe even president?" I stared at him. "I work nights. I don't have time to babysit hedges and holiday lights. You also have a camera system that caught a criminal in the act and saved this place from bankruptcy. People trust you." I didn't say yes. Not then, but I did start drafting the petition. Over the next few days, neighbors who had barely acknowledged each other started coming together. We met in backyards, over fences, even inside garages with folding chairs and clipboards. People shared their stories, fines they'd paid without cause, letters they'd sent that were never answered, projects they'd abandoned after being told they violated code, only to see Cheryl approve the same thing for her friend 2 doors down. One guy, Alan, revealed that Cheryl had charged him $500 for unauthorized fence paint. He showed us a receipt. It was the exact same brand and color she used on her own fence. Another neighbor, Jamie, had been fined for excessive yard noise the day after hosting a small birthday party for her son. The recording she played for us. Nothing but laughter and someone singing off-key. Within a week, we had over 60% of the neighborhood signed on. Enough to dissolve the current board and call for a special election. The city sent a liaison to oversee the process. Her name was Monica, and she wore a badge that said Municipal Oversight Committee. She reviewed the footage, the ledger, and the petition. Her first words after reading the signatures were simple. "You've built quite the case here. This HOA is officially under administrative review. You'll be given temporary authority to manage operations until a new board is elected." Greg grinned. "Guess that makes you interim president, Mason." "Great," I said. "First order of business, no more surprise visits with measuring tapes." That got a few laughs, but I wasn't done. I used the footage from my cameras to write up a full report for the Oversight Committee, documenting every instance of improper conduct. I included timestamps, witness statements, and a full list of residents impacted. Monica scanned it and nodded. "You're thorough." "You ever consider working in code enforcement?" "Only if I can wear pajamas to meetings." The special election was held 2 weeks later. I didn't campaign, but I didn't have to. People knew who had exposed the scheme. Trina ran for secretary. Greg took treasurer. The Patel twins ran as co-chairs for community engagement. We were sworn in the following Monday. Our first act was to hire a third-party auditor to clean up the financials. The results were worse than we thought. Cheryl had been double-charging select residents, funneling money into a separate account listed under a fake landscaping company. The fake invoices matched payments in the spiral notebook. The fraud went back nearly 6 years. Rays filed additional charges. By the time Cheryl went to trial, the case was being watched statewide. It turned out she'd pulled similar stunts in a different HOA before moving here. This time, though, the evidence was airtight. Between the camera footage, the ledger, and the audit, the DA had more than enough. She was convicted on counts of fraud, mail tampering, and criminal trespass. Sentenced to 3 years with restitution required to every resident she'd fined under false pretenses. The day after the verdict, Don sold the house and left town. We voted to remove the HOA Dropbox permanently. Instead, we moved all correspondence to a secure online portal that tracked every submission, time-stamped and transparent. No more mysterious fines, no more midnight inspections, and no more unchecked power. As for me, I kept the cameras. Not because I expected more trouble, just because peace of mind is hard to come by. Especially when you've seen what someone's willing to do for control. And every so often, someone new moves in, sees the camera above my garage, and asks if we're one of those neighborhoods with a strict HOA. I just tell them the truth. We were. But not anymore. 3 weeks after Cheryl's conviction, the neighborhood had changed in ways I never could have predicted. For the first time since I'd moved in, people were lingering on their porches in the evenings, chatting across driveways, even organizing weekend cookouts without fearing some obscure violation would be slapped on their door the next morning. The shadows she'd cast over the community had finally lifted, and not just figuratively. It was a Friday morning when I got a call from Monica, our contact from the Municipal Oversight Committee. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I need you to come down to City Records this afternoon," she said. "There's something you should see. Bring Greg." That was all she gave me. We arrived at the city's planning office, where Monica led us to a back room lined with filing cabinets and a large table in the center. Already waiting there was a man in a charcoal suit with a briefcase and a badge clipped to his belt. Tobias Linton, a federal investigator from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He laid out a thick folder and opened it without preamble. Back in 2019, he began, your HOA filed for a federal beautification grant. The application was approved and a sum of $35,000 was released over a 2-year period. Greg leaned forward. We never saw a cent of that. Not a single project was funded from outside money, Tobias nodded. That tracks. According to the records, the funds were allocated for 4 public-facing projects: a community garden, a storm drain upgrade, a mural by a local artist, and a walking trail extension. None of those exist, correct? Correct, I said. We don't even have space for a trail. He flipped a page. The invoices submitted to HUD looked clean on paper, signed, itemized, and dated. But when we ran them through our verification system, we discovered every vendor listed was either dissolved, never existed, or was owned by a shell company registered under aliases tied to Cheryl Haskins. Greg exhaled slowly. She didn't just skim HOA dues. She defrauded the federal government. That's why we're involved now. She's being charged under Title 18, Section 1000, for false claims and misappropriation of federal funds. We've already seized 2 bank accounts linked to the shell corporations. And we need your help identifying any residents who were coerced into signing off on documents they didn't understand. I can get you names, I said. Some of them are still nervous about being involved, but if they know there's a bigger case, they'll talk. Monica added, we're also freezing all HOA financial activity until this is resolved. A temporary auditor will be assigned to ensure no further violations occur. Greg raised an eyebrow. You're not shutting us down, are you? On the contrary, Tobias said. You're the reason we caught this. If it weren't for that camera footage and the paper trail you provided, this might have stayed buried. The next few days were a whirlwind. I helped coordinate interviews between residents and HUD investigators, while Greg and Trina organized a new filing system to preserve every HOA record we could find. The Patel twins digitized everything into a secure cloud drive, complete with access logs and read-only permissions. Then came the unexpected discovery. During a review of Cheryl's old correspondence files, we uncovered a manila envelope buried inside a box of unrelated gardening brochures. Inside were notarized letters, real ones, from a dozen homeowners who had formally requested to dissolve their HOA membership. Each letter was ignored and never filed. One of them was from a man named Elias Monroe, who had moved out 2 years ago after being fined repeatedly for supposed roof discoloration. His letter included a clause citing a rarely used state statute that allowed residents to petition for individual withdrawal from HOA jurisdiction under specific conditions. I called him that same evening. I remember that letter, Elias said, his voice tired but steady. I sent it certified mail and never heard back, figured they tossed it. You were right, I said, but we found it, and 10 others like it. He paused. You think we can get our money back, more than that? With this many suppression attempts, we might be able to trigger a class action. By the end of the week, a civil attorney specializing in HOA litigation took on the case pro bono after reviewing the evidence. He submitted a motion for restitution and damages, citing emotional distress, unlawful fines, and suppression of legal withdrawal attempts. The judge approved the motion for class certification. Cheryl, already facing federal charges, was now staring down a multi-resident civil suit backed by hard evidence and city support. Meanwhile, the neighborhood finally got a taste of what a functioning HOA could look like. We held our first community forum in the open-air lot behind Trina's grooming van. No podiums, no clipboards, just folding chairs, iced tea, and a whiteboard labeled what we actually want. People suggested things that made sense: repaving the cracked sidewalks, planting wildflowers by the park sign, organizing a fall cleanup day. Someone asked about holiday lights and whether there'd ever be rules about them again. No rules, I said. Just don't blind your neighbors. That got a round of applause, but the final chapter arrived in a way none of us expected. One morning in early October, an envelope from the county arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't junk mail or a fine, just an official notice. The HOA, as originally chartered, had been dissolved. Its registration had been revoked due to sustained misconduct, and a new civic association was being formed in its place with limited authority and full resident oversight. No more shadow meetings. No more enforcement by clipboard. And as for me, I stepped down after helping build the new structure. Trina became the first chairwoman of the Civic Association, with the Patel twins handling infrastructure and Greg overseeing finances with a new third-party accountant. I went back to night shifts at the hospital, where at least the chaos was honest. On my last evening as acting president, I stood out on my porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Greg joined me, sipping something from a thermos. "You did good, Mason," he said. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "I just wanted to keep my camera from getting smashed," he laughed once. "Funny how that turned into federal indictments and a neighborhood renaissance." I glanced up at the small, sleek camera mounted above my garage. It blinked green, recording nothing more than a quiet street and the shadows of neighbors waving to each other. "Sometimes," I said, "you just need the right angle." Greg raised his thermos like a toast. "To the right angle." We stood there for a while longer, watching the porch lights flicker on one by one, each one glowing warm and steady. No threats, no fines, no fear, just neighbors, finally free from the broom-wielding tyrant who thought a clipboard gave her the right to control a community. She was wrong. We didn't need control, we just needed each other.